In this foreign city, she had no home, no family, no friends. Every street whispered doubt, every night carried loneliness. Every face she saw was a stranger, every step felt heavy. Yet within her heart burned a small light she didn't even know existed. It was that light that kept her moving, even when the world seemed to reject her. How would she survive all alone? This is her story, a journey of courage, hope, and the hidden strength within. She stepped off the train into a city that felt both alive and indifferent. The streets were unfamiliar, the voices around her strange, the air heavy with a language she barely understood. In her hand, she clutched a small suitcase, her only possession, her only connection to a past that now seemed distant. Alone, she walked through the crowded avenues, every step a mix of fear and determination. Every face was a stranger, every glance a reminder that she had no one here. Yet somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark flickered, a quiet, stubborn flame she didn't even know she had. This city could feel cold, but it was hers to navigate. And so her journey began. The morning light fell weakly through the narrow windows of her tiny rented room. She had no family to guide her, no friends to call, only the uncertain streets outside. Hunger and fatigue followed her as she tried to navigate the city. Finding a small cafe for breakfast, reading signs she barely understood, asking strangers for directions, every misstep reminded her that she was utterly alone. Yet, with each challenge, she discovered a small resilience she hadn't realized she possessed. Even when the city seemed indifferent, she kept moving forward. Every street, every stranger, every wrong turn was a lesson, shaping the woman she was slowly becoming. That afternoon, as she wandered through a narrow alley, she stumbled upon a small bookstore. The owner, an elderly woman with gentle eyes, smiled at her hesitant greeting. For the first time in this city, someone treated her not as a stranger, but as a human being. She lingered, watching the way light spilled across the dusty shelves, feeling a warmth she hadn't realized she was craving. Even a simple act, a kind smile, a helpful word, was enough to remind her that perhaps the world wasn't entirely indifferent. Yet outside the door, the bustling streets reminded her she was still alone, still navigating the city without a map, without guidance. Evening fell, and the streets grew colder and more intimidating. She realized she had no clear destination. The map in her hand was confusing, and the people she asked for directions often didn't understand her. Hunger gnawed at her, fatigue weighed down her shoulders, and the loneliness felt sharper than ever. She tried to take the subway, but missed her stop and ended up somewhere unfamiliar. Panic rose in her chest. The city suddenly seemed enormous, unwelcoming, and impossible to navigate alone. Yet, in the midst of fear, she remembered the tiny spark in her heart, the small light that had carried her this far. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and reminded herself that giving up was not an option. Night fell like a heavy curtain over the city. She wandered through dimly lit streets, her small suitcase dragging behind her, every step echoing in the empty alleys. The cold bit at her cheeks and the distant hum of traffic sounded almost hostile, like a city that did not want her there. She found a quiet bench in a small park and sat, letting exhaustion wash over her. Her stomach ached from hunger, but worse than that was the gnawing fear, the realization that she truly had no one here. Memories of home flickered in her mind, a warm room, familiar voices, the comfort of being known. But they were gone, unreachable, and she felt a pang of helplessness. Yet, even in the darkest moments, her tiny spark of hope refused to die. She pressed her hands against her chest, feeling the heartbeat that reminded her she was alive, still capable of moving forward. She whispered to herself, "I will survive. Somehow I will find my way." Morning light was weak, barely spilling through the gray clouds. She dragged her tired feet through unfamiliar streets, scanning for a place that felt safe, even for a few hours. Every door seemed closed, every building indifferent. The city was alive, yet she felt invisible. She approached a small cafe, hesitant, unsure if she had the right to even sit there. Inside, the warm smell of coffee and bread greeted her. A barista nodded as she quietly ordered a small cup, and for the first time in hours, she felt a fragile sense of comfort. Alone, yes, but not entirely without human kindness. Each sip of coffee reminded her survival was possible, one small moment at a time. And so, despite exhaustion and fear, She kept moving, keeping her eyes on the streets ahead, searching for somewhere, anything, to call a temporary home. By midday, the city revealed its harsher side. Streets crowded with people who didn't notice her, sounds clashing in ways that made her head spin. A sudden downpour forced her under a narrow awning, shivering as the rain soaked through her thin coat. She realized she had no umbrella, no proper shoes, nothing to protect her. She tried to ask someone for directions to a hostel, but the language barrier made communication frustrating. Each failed attempt added weight to her growing sense of isolation. Yet, as she stood there, soaked and tired, she remembered her tiny spark of hope. "I have to keep going," she whispered to herself. "I may not know the way yet, but I will find it." Late afternoon brought a narrow, quiet street lined with small shops. One, a tiny bookstore, seemed inviting. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled at her. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not just as a stranger wandering through a city, but as a person. The woman offered her a cup of tea, and they sat together in silence. It wasn't much, but it was warmth, connection, a tiny reminder that not all was hostile. She left the shop feeling a little lighter, carrying with her the knowledge that even in a city that seemed indifferent, kindness could be found. Night returned quickly, and with it, shadows that seemed larger than life. The streets felt endless, twisting, each corner a reminder that she had no home. She clutched her coat tighter around herself, listening to distant footsteps and city sounds that felt both alive and threatening. She found herself standing in front of a bridge overlooking dark waters. The wind howled, carrying the sounds of the city into her bones. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she focused on the spark inside, the quiet flame of determination that had carried her this far. "I will not give up," she whispered and pressed forward step by step. One morning, as she navigated the labyrinthine streets, a stray dog appeared, timidly wagging its tail. She offered it a piece of her bread, and for the first time in days, she felt a small connection to another living being. The dog followed her for a few blocks, providing comfort she hadn't realized she was craving. Though it was just an animal, it reminded her that companionship could be found in unexpected ways. Even in solitude, small joys were possible. One evening, she missed her train stop again, ending up in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. Anxiety pressed against her chest like a weight she could not lift. She wandered through dim alleys, unsure of where to go, until she stumbled upon a small community center with light spilling from the windows. A volunteer noticed her hesitation and gestured for her to come inside. That night, for the first time, she slept somewhere safe, feeling the tiniest relief she had felt in weeks. The days blurred together. She learned to read the streets, to navigate the language slowly, to survive on what little she had. Each hardship, each moment of loneliness, became a lesson, teaching her resilience, patience, and the quiet strength within her. Though the city was vast and often unwelcoming, she began to understand that she was growing stronger, more capable of facing whatever came next. With time, she found small routines, a cafe for breakfast, a quiet park for reflection, a library where she could sit undisturbed. Independence became a strange but empowering feeling. She realized she could survive alone, not because the city made it easy, but because she refused to surrender to fear. One rainy night, she lost her wallet containing the last of her money. Panic surged through her chest. The city now felt merciless, but instead of collapsing, she focused on small solutions, helping at a cafe in exchange for a meal, carrying out errands for kindness. Each small victory reminded her that survival was not just about luck. It was about perseverance and resourcefulness. Weeks passed. She began to know the city, which streets were safe, which cafes she could linger in, which faces brought warmth. She started writing in a small journal, chronicling her experiences, her thoughts, her fears, and her small victories. For the first time, she felt a sense of ownership over her life. The city, once cold and indifferent, began to feel like a place where she could carve out her own space. One afternoon, she helped a lost child find their way home. The child's parents thanked her warmly. That small act of kindness, so simple yet meaningful, ignited something inside her. She realized that even without family or friends of her own, she could make a difference in the lives of others. Her purpose was no longer just survival, it was connection, compassion, and courage. Night fell again, but this time, she stood by the window of her small apartment, looking out over the city she had once feared. The streets still whispered uncertainty. The faces were still mostly strangers, but the spark inside her had grown into a steady flame. She was no longer just a girl lost in a city. She was a young woman who had faced fear, loneliness, and hardship, and had survived. The city was still vast and challenging, but now she carried within her a light that no darkness could extinguish. This was her story, a journey of courage, hope, and the hidden strength we all carry within.